plans for Netflix series The Crown to recreate Princess Diana's final hours have sparked enormous controversy. Joining me on the programme is Emily Andrews, live from South London. She's the royal expert. Hello, Emily.
Hello, darling Vanessa. How are you?
I'm just fine. It's great to have you on the show. I want to start by saying, you know, The Crown is a soar-away success. It is great to watch. It's absolutely engrossing. You can't take your eyes off it. It's beautifully done in terms of, you know, recreating the period and making everything look absolutely right. However, when watching it, there are those moments where you think, A, how could they possibly know, you know, what the Queen and Prince Philip said to one another in the royal boudoir? And B, once I've seen it, I can never unsee it. Having seen it, I'm going to think that's what happened. I'm going to believe in it. And what if what I'm believing isn't true at all?
Well, and you've hit the nail on the head. It is fiction. It is based on real events, but this is not necessarily real dialogue. We don't know what Philip and Elizabeth said to each other in the 2 years after they were married, and you know, before Philip went off on that infamous tour for 6 months to Australia. The show's writer obviously does a lot of research. They do have historians and researchers that they can talk to and that they can try and get as much relevant detail as possible. In fact, some members of staff who used to work for Charles and Camilla, and Diana, I understand, have advised on this current series, The Crown. But I think you're right. We have to remember that it is fiction. But I guess the problem is I think if you're British and you're watching this, you've probably got quite a large hinterland of what actually did and didn't happen. Perhaps internationally, those global audiences are not perhaps as au fait with the details of the British royal family, might be tempted to think that this is actually what happened, when of course it wasn't.
I mean, one of the issues that has raised its head, and which will happen when people who are now being featured in The Crown, the drama, are still alive and therefore can come forward. They're not members of the royal family. They're not bound by any kind of sacred code of honour. And they can say, hang on a minute, that's me that's being depicted on screen. I never said that. I wasn't there. This isn't what happened. And one of those people who's done this is Sir John Major, the previous Prime Minister, who said he is featured in the forthcoming series having conversations with the then Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, about the Queen possibly abdicating. Now, if you watch that, you'll just take it in as you take any other scene, and you'll assume that's what happened. And he has come forward to say, I didn't, I wasn't, we never would have had that conversation. It's entirely inappropriate. It never happened. It never would have happened or could have happened. And this is no more than malicious fiction. So Sir John Major thinks it's more than just a diverting drama. He's featured in it in fictionalised scenes that never happened, and he's really, really annoyed about it, furious.
Yeah, and I don't blame him, because as we said, some people might watch it and think, oh, I never knew that. Charles wants to overthrow his mother, because that's what the scene basically says. Charles wants to overthrow his mother because she's too old, and actually there should be a new young gun on the block in Prince Charles, and he should take over from his mother, as some other European monarchies have done that. We've seen that, for example, in Spain. And so I think that is really problematic. And I think one thing that the Crown could do, and there were calls for it last year, and 2 years ago, was that as we're coming closer and closer to the current day and to events that some of us lived through, and definitely some of us remember, the Crown should put a disclaimer saying, this is based on real events, but it is fiction. I think that would probably be quite sensible, and perhaps it would protect it from accusations such as this. Because when you have, especially when you have a politician like Sir John Major, who, by the way, was very close to the Queen, he was one of her Knights of the Garter, he knew her well. And I think when you've got someone like Sir John Major who's come out and said, this is absolute balderdash, and not only is it wrong, but it's malicious, I think that's actually very damaging for Netflix. Because they're treading this line of wanting to have the glitz and the glamour of this amazing royal drama, and they want to portray it as correct, factually accurate as far as they can. But when they get august politicians come out and say this is absolute rubbish, then I think that damages their brand.
Exactly. Let's talk to Richard Fitzwilliams, the royal commentator. Hello, Richard. Thank you for joining us. Nice to see you. So this scene featuring John Major and the then Prince Charles discussing the abdication of the Queen, and apparently Prince Charles is depicted as thinking this would be a jolly good idea, portraying his mother as out of touch, thinking it's really high time they overthrew her and he took over. And John Major says, Sir John Major, it never happened. It's absolute fiction, it's malicious fiction. I think you can explain why this conversation never would or could have happened.
Absolutely, because what the Crown, which Peter Morgan is very good sometimes in mixing politics and
Peter Morgan's the writer of the Crown.
Yes, indeed, it's his creation. And what he apparently thought was quite clever, and it isn't, is the scene, the whole series has apparently links to Queen Victoria and King Edward VII, because apparently Charles is supposed to think, oh, look at that amount of time Edward VII waited. And of course that by implication means
and he
that
did wait. He waited till his mother was how old? And he was how old?
Oh, well, yes, indeed.
She was in her late 90s or something?
Famously, he said that I don't mind praying to an eternal father, but I must be the only man in England saddled with an eternal mother. But the problem, as you quite correctly have said, is firstly, Charles would never, as Prince of Wales, make a comment like that to a prime minister, which would be farcical, which would be bizarre in point of fact. It would show quite literally, and that might actually tune in with what the Crown thinks of the Prince of Wales. Don't forget what we saw when Josh O'Connor played the Prince of Wales. He was a spineless, imbecilic wimp. Now, someone like that might very well have these weird ideas, and if you play the character, and of course we haven't seen it, it's not out till early November.
But we're hearing a lot about it.
And we're hearing a lot about it, and John Major is ill-advised, by the way, may I say, to urge people to boycott it. The problem is the moment you're asked to boycott something, the natural response, I'm afraid, is to watch it.
But I don't think he's ill-advised, in my own opinion, at all, to say it never happened, it's not true.
Oh, no, of course
I think that because all the way through watching it, you kept thinking, did this happen? Could this have happened? Did they know what they were saying? How could they know? And none of the royal family could come out and say, we did, we didn't, and some of them were already dead, so they couldn't. But he isn't, and he is alive, and he said nothing like this occurred at all. Let me bring in Emily Andrews again. Emily, talking about the Martin Bashir interview, the Panorama interview, which is going to be featured prominently in this new series of The Crown. But obviously, Prince William has called for it not to be, and also we now know the nefarious means, a really kind of a crooked and unpleasant means by which Martin Bashir secured the interview. Doesn't mean we didn't all watch it. It doesn't mean it wasn't on TV. It was. But now we know the circumstances. Do you feel that the interview should be featured in a prominent way, or do you think it should have been somehow scaled down in importance?
Well, I think that if you're going to dramatise these events, then you have to include that infamous interview with Princess Diana and Martin Bashir. And now you have to obviously include the detail that's come out as to how Bashir got that interview by effectively faking documents, telling Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, that Charles and all the palace apparatchiks were spying on her, out to get her, to really kind of increase her paranoia. I think that all of that has to be covered. In fact, actually, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to one of the Crown's historical
advisors.
Yes.
Advisors, yes, exactly.
Thanks, Richard.
One of the Crown's consultants.
Yes.
And I mean, he's very team Diana. And so he said that, yes, that had all been, taken into consideration. That's going to be shown. But I think, to pick up Richard's point about Peter Morgan has been, anyway, in the past, on record as saying that he has Republican leanings, Republican sympathies. It is his creation, the Crown, and it's brilliantly done in so many ways. But I think you do have to remember, like with every newspaper or TV piece of news that you watch, there potentially could be an agenda. And I do wonder, I personally think the last series of The Crown, neither Diana or Charles came across particularly well. And I think in this current series of The Crown, I think that dichotomy will still be shown. I think probably both Charles and Diana perhaps not going to get the most sympathetic of portrayals. But for most people, Diana was 18 when she married Charles. The rights and wrongs of whether they should get married or not have been obviously well rehearsed. but she was only 18, and so I think we can't really escape from that fact. Many men who've watched the last series have said to me, men of older teenage daughters, keep repeating that to me. She was only 18, Emily. I cannot believe that kind of happened. And so I think it's very tricky for Netflix. And of course,
very tricky. Let me bring Richard back in, because we've discussed John Major and these fictional scenes of talking about abdication. Our texter Terry in Ramsbottom says John Major should sue for libel. Sheila says, Vanessa, well, I expect John Major would deny it, even if it did happen. I'm not sure he'd go to great pains to deny something that really happened. But anyway,
No,
front page of The Sun, though, this is what I want to talk to you about, Richard. It says, Crown Diana crash outrage. Crew say that shock episode crosses the line. And I wonder what you think about, the car crash that killed the late Princess of Wales being depicted in such considerable detail, etc.
Well, of course, we haven't seen it, but having said that, this is obviously going to be hypersensitive, just as Panorama, and we know how duplicitously that was obtained, as you've been discussing. It's ghastly that they will be looking into it. Equally, you couldn't possibly, as Emily said, you couldn't possibly have this sort of series and ignore it. So far as Diana's tragic death is concerned, this is treading on eggshells. And I'd also mention that perhaps Harry might care to reassess his comments previously made to James Corden about the Crown being broadly in line with the way royal life tends to be, because this is going to cause a lot of hurt, a lot of trouble, a lot of pain. And those making the Crown, Peter Morgan's creation, knew perfectly well when they intruded into the grief, and there was plenty of it in various ways in the 1990s, that's precisely what it would do.
So do you think it shouldn't have been made at all?
That is, I would have thought it would have been more appropriate to end it where the fourth episode ended, perhaps with the fifth tagged-on episode, I mean, or
series,
episode, a couple yes, but I mean series that 20 more to come. I mean, that will bask in the royal family's discomfiture, because one thing is absolutely clear. This series has a Republican agenda, and if you want proof, it's not only Peter Morgan saying it's a royal family is like a mutating virus. It's not just a case of the facts that every single royal person, apart from Diana in the last series, was cold, nasty, duplicitous, adulterous, or intentionally so, or snobbish. It is also the fact that what they've left out. Why wasn't Princess Anne's kidnapping, the attempted kidnapping of Princess Anne in 1974 included? Why wasn't the 1981 6 shots fired at the Queen in Tripping the Colour, look at her sang-froid, the way she was able to continue? Why wasn't that in? The way they picked episodes and the spin they put on them, and the cruelty in some of it, including an episode dealing with the Duke of Edinburgh's sister and her death in an air crash when pregnant in 1936.
Yes, which was skewed events completely. Let's just have Emily with the final word on this. Emily, there will be lots of people watching and listening this afternoon who are just thinking, well, I love it. You know, it's really good entertainment. It's expensive. It looks beautifully shot. The performance is terrific. You know, Imelda Staunton's playing the Queen. She can't ever put a foot wrong. You know, loving every second of it. Why are people criticising something which doesn't set out to be anything other than fiction? It's drama. It's meant to be invented. What would you say to them?
I think I would say that what's interesting is that King Charles cares about the Crown. He is partly responsible through his press team for some of these headlines that we've seen about anger and the depictions that it's wrong. Make no mistake, he really cares. He's worried about his popularity and his reputation. The ghost of Diana still stalks him.
Well, there you have another agenda, don't you? You have an agenda on one side that might be Republican, an agenda on the other that is very concerned about popularity at a very delicate time. So thank you both very much indeed.